Hello again, Julia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps I'll dash right into it. This is slightly over 100 days of your new appointment. Not so new anymore at the SFC, but certainly this is during an unprecedented time. We put the pandemic behind us, and we're also facing lots of geopolitical and also challenges as Hong Kong reopens. And then with your new appointment to this role, I think it's fair to say Hong Kong is faced with a new beginning. So let me start with you first. What are your upcoming priorities?
Maintaining a resilient and orderly market is always the DNA of the capital market regulators. This is particularly important in this very challenging and unusual time. The last few years, as you put it, is anything but normal. We have a war broke out in Ukraine. You have the inflation rates, global inflation rates going up. You have the interest rates going up, and you have the pandemic slowly getting behind us. But throughout this time, you have a geopolitical tension continuing, and Hong Kong is caught in between it. It's a bit of like everything everywhere all at once. But Hong Kong has come out resilient through these episodes. Our financial infrastructure has been resilient. Our intermediaries who participate in the market has sufficient liquidity buffer and has come out quite well. But nonetheless, I think it is important. Going forward, we will continue to see pockets of volatilities like the mini regional banking crisis or the loss of a global Swiss bank. We will continue to see pockets of instability or volatilities. So it pays to be vigilant. Now, for the SFC, we will be stepping up our market surveillance. We have been in the past. And in March, we implemented smoothly the investor ID, which will give us extra additional capacity to look into the underlying investors and their behavior. That adds on to our toolkit to monitor outsized concentrated position across markets, on market, off market. So I think this part is important. Now, the second priority is we continue to adopt a steadfast zero tolerance towards market misconduct. Just 2 days ago, we issued restriction notices on 10 brokers to freeze accounts linked to social media ram and dump scheme. So this kind of misconduct we will continue to enforce and enforce effectively to deter such market behavior. A lot of you ask about the virtual asset trading platform. Of course, our priority this year is to implement it. We have concluded, the consultation period has just ended. We are collating responses. There are over 150 responses, many of them very thoughtful, and we will look closely into the feedback, and we're aiming to issue the final guidelines and conclusions in May before the commencement. Now, the trading platform is an important linchpin to the entire ecosystem of Web 3.0. The underlying technology of blockchain, it has the potential to change the way in which businesses are being done. So we are embracing that kind of technology, but we also ask our licensed corporations or our intermediaries to be responsible in the innovation of it. Now, the fourth priority would be sustainable finance. I think Hong Kong is driving investment, has a pivotal role to play in driving investment in this part of the world to finance the transition to a greener economy and low carbon economy. And I think just a couple of weeks ago, the exchange issued the consultation on the requirements on listed companies on their climate-related corporate reporting. Now, this part is important because you do need this kind of information before you can, for asset managers to integrate climate in their investment decisions. And later today, the SFC is going to contribute and announce our own decarbonization goal. That is, we aim to become carbon neutral by 2050, and also to reduce our carbon footprint, carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. Last but not the least is I do think that we have a role to play in enhancing Hong Kong as an international financial center to improve its competitiveness. And with that, I think coming out of COVID, Hong Kong is lower than other jurisdictions. It really makes us think hard about what we should do better in order to expand. So there is a strategy which revolves around expansion of the stock connects and other connect schemes. I think I'll stop here. There's enough priorities. 5.
That's a lot on your plate, and it's a huge development. I'm not sure if you remember, the last time we welcomed you on this stage at Bloomberg was in 2019, where we, together with the European Commission and also our Vice Chair, Mary Shapiro, who chairs who's the Secretary for TCFD, when we had a conversation on introducing what is TCFD. Now, 2023, we've moved on a lot, and SFC has been pivotal in driving the sustainability journey in Hong Kong. So it's great news to hear that. I'll pick up a few points that you just mentioned in terms of priorities and policies. Before I go on, I just want to remind everyone that there is a QR code. So if you have specific questions, please do submit them. And that will be the chat. I have an iPad here. Then I will, by chronological order, look for questions to quiz and get answers from Julia. Now, a bit more on your priorities. You mentioned about some of the regulatory enforcements, for example. Are there any particular regulatory implementation to enforcement actions that we're looking on? And are there any particular areas of regulation you're planning to focus in surrounding those themes that you just mentioned?
Our regulatory action or our agenda is closely aligned with the priorities, of course. As I mentioned, resilience is, an orderly market is top on our priority, which means that we will look very closely into the risk management measures of intermediaries. For the last few years, we stress tested them quite a lot, but we'll continue to do so, and we continue to look for signs in which we need to follow up on, particularly in position building and in tools which will allow us to see through better. The exchange have moved to cover 2 in enhancing their default funds in the futures market. So this is and also we will soon be concluding on our risk management measures for futures brokers. So along those lines, we are always looking to enhance the risk management, and also we continue to inspect on fund managers, particularly looking for the liquidity stress testing in these areas. Now, since we will be the VATP will commence, the licensing regime will commence, we certainly will look very carefully into enforcing the MNO amendment bill, in which for any fraudulent measures, scams in the particularly in because the new law actually gave us power to weed off those scam activities. And so we'll be looking very carefully. So we do have for those platforms which are not applying for a license and which do not get our deemed compliant, but they are still in activity or still operating, then we'll be looking very carefully to see, and we will be warning them, and they better cease their activities and business.
I think that's a loud indication as well, as we're looking forward to the consultation conclusions as well to that. I'll dissect a bit about the priorities as well. You mentioned about sustainability, of course, being a very important part as SFC co-chairs the steering committee, the cross-agency steering committee. The most, I think, apparent and soon to happen is the ISSB. Could you maybe walk us through about the expectations, how SFC is collaborating with the Hong Kong Exchange from that part?
The consultation that I just mentioned on the listed companies' corporate climate-related reporting practices, this is referencing the ISSB standards. Now, the ISSB standards, the final version won't be released until end of June. But then there's been a lot of publications, a lot of their decisions been published. So based on what's been published, we worked very closely with Exchange to put out that set of that's a set of requirements for consultation. We are aware that there's a need for transition, there's a need for scalability and phasing in. So we are trying to build, as you can tell from the consultation, a lot of flexibility has been built in. But while we are allow flexibility, we do not lose sight of the ambition to comply with the most important recommendations of the ISSB in terms of climate. This is, and also in my other capacity with the Sustainable Task Force under the IOSCO, we worked very closely in that group in order to see and assess the ISSB standards to see if IOSCO could provide a endorsement to the standards. And so in the process, actually, we've also reflected the need to be scalable, the need to be pragmatic, and we also understand that particularly in this part of the world, data for Scope 3 will be very difficult. So, but it has to start somewhere, and so we allow transition, but then we are also working on with other peer regulators in Hong Kong on capacity building in the data collection, things which will help, particularly if you are an SME, to comply with these reporting requirements.
Absolutely. This, I think it takes private and public and of all sizes of the organization to work together in this green and sustainable journey. Now, enough about the priorities, loud and clear. We now look into Hong Kong as a whole. You're right about Hong Kong has been a tad slower than our neighbors in terms of reopening, but we also see that our government has launched many new policies to help with that. From your interaction with the industry, what are the pain points that the market has been coming to you reflecting those are challenges? And obviously, we have many, many asks as well. And what is on their wish list telling us that those are the ingredients for Hong Kong's success yet again?
You should actually ask the industry themselves, but anyway, you put me on the spot. We've been, of course, in constant discussions and consultation sessions with the industry associations, and in particular to the point about the wealth management industry. I do understand that they've find some of the requirements, which we think that there are ways in which we can actually streamline. One particular point is what the financial secretary has put in his budget about the suitability and disclosure requirements for the ultra high net worth and sophisticated investors, whether something can be done to streamline it. We are in good progress, joining hands with the HKMA in discussion with private banks association in having a proposal which is quite mature to streamline it. Basically, the idea is you front load the assessment, the risk appetites, and front load the assessment when you are onboarding client or when you're doing it. And then in the subsequent transactions, that process can be, you have already established experience or whether they know the knowledge on the products. And so subsequent transactions, you don't have to do it on a transaction by transaction basis. So in a way, it's a more risk-based approach for these ultra high net worth and sophisticated investors. It's more risk-based, but without without compromising the investor protection standards.
I might come back to the wealth angle shortly, but you also mentioned your ongoing conversation with Hong Kong Exchange, as you mentioned, ISSB, and also with Hong Kong MA on a number of different issues. So no doubt there are shared conversation with your regulatory partners. What are the current conversations with the government, for example? Can you share some insight on that?
I was in Beijing with Eddie Yu, Clement Zheng, our peer regulators of IA and HKMA, and also with under the leadership of the financial secretary, and calling on our counterparts in the financial regulators in Beijing. So it's very clear that the development agenda, particularly with the cross-border opportunities and connect schemes, are pretty much very aligned. So in Beijing, I've actually been in Beijing twice in as many months. The impression I get from the counterparts from the leadership in Beijing, financial leadership in Beijing, is very supportive of Hong Kong development as an IFC. Is not just supportive of Hong Kong to develop and make it a better IFC. They also see that opportunity to use Hong Kong's unique status, unique characteristics as an IFC, for them to connect to the rest of the world. In this continued geopolitical tension, they are actually demonstrating a determination to couple and couple more, not decouple. In their words, they said, fight decoupling. And so they are actually trying, and they also see the benefits of Hong Kong being the place connecting the capital markets on the mainland and the rest of the world. And I think this is it's something which will actually suggest that our role will actually expand in this time. So we discussed quite a lot of the connect schemes and a lot of the wish lists that the industry have is on our agenda, is in full discussion. That would include Wealth Management Connect 2.0. That would include the mutual recognition of funds. That would include diversifying the products on the Stock Connect. They recognize that Stock Connect is the most efficient and effective way for flows, to encourage the flows between mainland and the rest of the world. They affirm the progress made so far. And so it's not just the cash market we want to expand, but also the derivatives market, and also putting more risk management tools, and also making it more user-friendly.
You've been instrumental over the years with the Connect program, so definitely the person for us to ask. So you've given us a roadmap, and it's with anticipation that I would say it's fair to say that the industry is looking for access to GBA. So in addition to all the Connect schemes, I think people are also looking for more meat to the next steps in GBA. And so allow me to put you on the spot here then. Is there any roadmap or specific timeline that people can look onto for the GBA so that we can accelerate Hong Kong's role to take advantage of the GBA and also so that the industry can plan ahead?
It's a hazardous business to predict timelines, particularly when you're working. You have a lot of you is probably working with in the mainland onshore for many years. I think it's I do think the pandemic set back a lot of things in terms of timeline, and having face-to-face and having more active visits, and you see a lot of people coming from GBA to Hong Kong and vice versa. Having interpersonal visits will help expedite that process. With Wealth Management Connect, I think there is widespread recognition that there's a lot more we can do by adding more products to what is being offered, and also by providing more flexibility in which you can explain that products cross-border. In some way, it is understandable that the first year of the first year is a difficult one because of the restrictions in travels and visits. But also, we are talking about having to craft a regime which basically have different regulations and different licensing arrangements, and how to make it work, I think is important, and how to what extent you can actually recognize that it is a well-regulated, harmonized area in which, as you put it, go tap into the real opportunity there. So we're working in that direction. What I can't deliver is a timeline, but I'm quite confident, and I hope that in the next few months there will be a lot of activities, and you will see concrete progress.
So a space to watch is what is the message here. So definitely, Hong Kong, no doubt, is the gateway to China, because we are the international finance center connecting it to the rest of the world. So a conversation cannot be complete without, so we've talked about China, but the conversation is not complete without looking at outside of China and outside of Hong Kong as we take part in the global stage. So with the geopolitical shocks and also the shake-up in the banking industry, the banking sector recently, what are the key considerations at the SFC right now?
I think it's not just about China. I totally, fully agree with you. Because we are international in a sense, and also we want to diversify the sources of listing, the sources of capital that come to Hong Kong. Now, in response to your question of thinking hard strategically, what needs to be done to enhance Hong Kong, I think it is, particularly when I take up this role as CEO, there are things which it's very clear that it won't change. It's the way we regulate, as principle-based, as predictable, and it's rooted in our Securities and Futures Ordinance. So this is and benchmark against the highest of international regulation in this in the capital markets. So this part will not change. We will continue to be impartial and also a very effective and pragmatic regulator. But there are things which needs to move with the times. You mentioned the part that don't change is important because you want the international capital who are familiar with the way that we regulate to be sticky and to have confidence in our market and continue to use our market going forward. But there are also new developments and new markets which we need to be tap into. Over the last few years, because of pandemic, people may not be paying a lot of attention. We've made a lot of adjustments to our listing regime, allowing tech firms, new economies. It started with the WVR and then the biotech, and now the specialist tech. Now, within a few years' time, new economy tech stocks has now become the largest section in our market, accounting for 40% of our market cap. So these are the changes that we have to capture the momentum of the new growth areas and continue. Virtual assets, digital economy is another area which we need to move the time, and also new sources of capital, whether it's from Middle East or Southeast Asia, unicorns from the rest of the world. So these are efforts which we need to double our efforts in order to attract. So I think, as I said, we reflect on what's not enough. I think we cannot be complacent, and the pandemic has taught us to be very humble.
Certainly a lot of work being done to cement Hong Kong's role and our efforts in attracting global investors. You brought in digital assets again as a way to attract new investors. I'm going to move to a Q&A. We are receiving a lot of Q&As, and no doubt a lot of them are on virtual assets. So allow me to borrow some time and read this out to you to see. So as of June 1st, the VASB licensing regime will be effective in Hong Kong, which means local VA exchanges will need to have license. Currently, there are many large offshore VA exchanges operating on a reverse solicitation basis. Do you see any action that the SFC would take against these exchanges? I'll follow up with another one. One of the largest and high-profile VA have launched VA derivative platform. So what is Hong Kong's SFC's views on derivatives, VA derivatives?
The AMNO law is very clear. If you are marketing a cryptocurrency exchange in Hong Kong, then it's in breach, and then we enforce. So, but we cannot prevent people who go through the internet and open an account and trade overseas. The same way as you can trade through a U.S. brokerage in the U.S. market. So, I think that is important. But it's only those who have got a license with the SFC or a deemed license for the first year, then you can market your activities here. So, as to derivatives, we put into our consultation documents seeking the industry's input and comment on what you think about having a derivatives market in Hong Kong. Now, this is area which I think last year we would not have done it, but we noted that this is something that industry is keen about, and so we put it in with a view to take a longer looking into it in the medium term. So we will further, based on the feedback we get, we will further consult on that.
Thank you. Coming back to Hong Kong facing the world, there has been ongoing market feedback that interoperability across the border is important to minimize market fragmentation. No doubt SFC has ongoing conversation with your global regulatory counterparts. Could you share with us in greater detail on some of the key international efforts that SFC is doing on the global stage?
Well, VA is an area which highlights the importance of global cooperation on this. we don't use the word interoperability for VA, but we are fair. But the other side of the coin is regulatory arbitrage. If Hong Kong is building a regime around investor protection and providing the all the protections in that a retail or professional investor expects, which is very similar to what you have in a traditional finance ATS or brokerage. It is not very, it will encourage arbitrage if the rest of the world, they can always go and trade as they like and they will put at risk. So, so I think particularly after the collapse of the FTX, the regulatory sector, IOSCO, for example, has already set up a task force in which SFC participated actively in coming out with recommendations and coordinating the baseline standards. And the baseline is pretty much what you expect. Well, we're probably the first one to come out with it because we have already started that journey 5 years ago. So the recommendations are expected from IOSCO, and we will expect the major markets to be adopting the baseline requirements that they will put on centralized exchange. The other task force is, the other committee is on decentralized finance, and they will be coming out with their recommendations as well. So I think by having globally a consensus and on adopting these recommendations, we can eliminate or at least mitigate the regulatory arbitrage. Sustainable finance is another one. The ISSB standards is going on its way to become an international baseline for corporate reporting. But how does it go with the EU APFRAC or the other US requirements? So it is an issue of interoperability, and financial institutions operating across markets would certainly like to see more harmonization of those standards. And so there is an ongoing discussions which driving towards a more harmonization or recognitions of those standards, which I think all of them you will see it's very much aligned with the TCFD recommendations. And so this is an ongoing work in progress, but we are aware of the pains in the industry that while the markets are global, the legislations are local.
And I think I might drill a bit more on that so that we understand SFC's role in this. You're being very modest here because you are also, as I understand, within IOSCO, the SFC also takes leadership in a number of conversations with regards to green finance development. And to Hong Kong, I think that is also very important, knowing that we not only have a seat around the table in the global stage, but our voice are also being heard as being one of the leading voices as well. Perhaps could you elaborate a bit more on that?
I sit on the, I'm the one of the two vice chairs at the Sustainable Task Force, which is the leading force in discussion with the ISSB in setting the global baseline I just talked about. I think it's important that because we are also a regulator in which we have a lot of responsibility in setting the right standards, requirements on the listed companies. And listed companies not only will affect our carbon emissions in Hong Kong, but 80% of our market cap are companies which operates on the mainland. And so it is important that the standards that we require, or the reporting requirements that we require on Hong Kong's listed companies is pragmatic but ambitious enough to move Hong Kong towards that goal. It is important that listed companies are also in compliance with those rules, because otherwise the international capital may bypass them. So we have a first-hand knowledge of what is acceptable and what is scalable and workable. And then we also would like to see that the ISSB standards are actually be able to see that as well. See the difficulties, see the barriers, see the data constraints in this part of the world, and provide a baseline which we can aspire to, or we can see that we can accomplish. And so we kind of work with the ISSB on the international standards, but also drive our companies to comply with those standards. So I think this is how we being a pragmatic regulator, but at the same time we want to see that we are actually in the driving seat in setting the international standards.
We often see settings from the industry perspective, having standard guidelines. It means cost and impediment or difficulties and challenges. But on the pathway towards net zero, I would like to say that it's very important to have standardized approach, just because we know how data is scarce. And it is and ensuring how global standards development are interoperable with local developments equally important. Because speaking from Hong Kong institutions, we want to ensure that when global investors look at your numbers, look at your disclosures, it's easily understood, so that we continue to be able to attract foreign capital.
That is quite true. I mean, our as a securities regulator, our first priority here is also investor protection. The reason why we step in is because we see, a few years ago, we see a lot of voluntary standards, and companies can cherry pick those standards which fit into their agenda and also use it as a marketing that they are very ESG. So that's why SFC stepped in, and we set our requirements on asset managers when that their labeling of their funds, the way that they integrate ESG into their investment decisions, the way that they disclose. So these are some of the things that we know that will lead to more comparable, more consistent, and more useful investment decisions for our investors. So this is also very important going forward. We are also, while we are setting those standards, we are also aware that there's a need for capacity building. There's a need to pull together data in order to allow SMEs who do not have the resources to be able to report. Because if you look at Scope 3, quite a lot of the value chains are actually in GBA area. You talk about exploration and cooperation. A lot in the GBA area, a lot with SME. How are they going to be able to report? How the company in Hong Kong, no matter how much they want to comply with the Scope 3, they need those data from the SMEs in order to estimate their Scope 3 emissions. So with the cross-agency steering group, which is co-led by the SFC and the HKMA with other regulators and government bureaus, we actually have a work on several programs. One is capacity building, one is training, and another one is working on a calculator and estimator tool to calculate the emissions. And this will be provided free of charge to the SME. But we do need data in order to make the estimation more accurate. And so we are, Monday, we actually had a meeting with the GBA relevant bureaus to talk about how to tap into or exchange of data in order we can get some SME data about the emissions, about the electricity bill, in order to make our database richer. So this is, at the same time we set standards, but at the same time we're aware that there's a gap there, and then we hope to bridge that gap with some of the more practical things that we helping the industry.
Certainly working closely with the industry. We've talked about getting standards, getting data, so that the right investment decisions can be made, hopefully to mobilize capital towards the right direction. But on the flip side of it, as a regulator, I think I can't go without asking about greenwashing. We've seen that in the international arena. Take Australia, for example. The Australian regulators have began very hard on in bringing court cases to greenwashing. To what extent SFC's plan is on introducing more guidance beyond just ESG fund, and how does SFC plan to tackle on greenwashing?
I think we have already required asset managers to disclose the emissions in their portfolio at the best effort basis. We also have very clear guidelines on how to label. If you call yourself a climate fund, then you have to demonstrate that it is what is called, and the required disclosure and the methodology to go with it. So I think this will go a long way in combating greenwashing. And of course, we would do our inspection, we would do our sampling to see how it is being implemented. We are working in one area, which is the use of data providers, because ESG data providers have very different outcomes and findings on their ratings on the same firm. And so this is identified as one of the area in which needs a little bit more harmonization. But because we do not regulate directly these ESG data providers, and so we are working on with the industry and also working on the guidelines, guidance to asset managers, indirectly having some requirements on how they select the ESG data providers, and having disclosed it, and how do they disclose it, how they're going to do their due diligence, and making sure that the investors understand what they're buying into.
I'm going to pick up one of the questions here, and I'm not too sure if it's being too granular, but there is the interlinkages, at least globally as well, between green and technology and digital finance. So recently, HKMA helped facilitate the launch of the tokenized green bonds. How does SFC see blockchain in new instruments like green bonds? How can blockchain technology be applicable beyond crypto assets?
There's a lot of discussion, and a lot of them do come to our fintech team with ideas, floating the ideas of green and technology. And I do see a lot of synergy, and it is certainly a new area which has been emphasized across China as well. So we did specifically, if it's tokenizing a green bond, something that we welcome. It doesn't change the nature of it, it's still a bond. If you tokenize an investment fund, it doesn't change the nature that it is an investment fund, and they all come under securities, the definition of securities in the Securities and Futures Commission. So if tokenizing, or assuming tokenizing it, will make it easier to for more robust settlement, more robust transactions, and better record making, we're all for it. More efficiency in this settlement. So I think we are all for any technology, responsible innovation, which will result in more robust and more transparent and more efficient clearing and settlement and investments.
You mentioned about innovation, and I think we have time for one more from the floor. we hear that SFC works closely with HKMA. We hear the tokenized green bonds. But now with respect to VASBs, there are also insurance requirements, to which we also spoke a bit about previously. So how would SFC drive the cross-sector dialogue to enable innovation whilst protecting investors' interests amidst the very limited availability of insurance in the market?
We're talking about very closely with the industry, and insurance authority are actually in touch with us on this because they see the difficulty. And also you see from the consultation document that we do not want the insurance costs to be prohibitively high. And so we are trying different ways in which to have to take a very reasonable approach in the final guidelines. 100% insurance is difficult. I do agree it is difficult in the current environment where insurers are certainly more cautious about cybersecurity and other risk associated with a platform. But in Hong Kong, the platform that we license will be very much regulated. So the cold storage part, I think, is something which is to ensure against fraud, scams. With a lot of the safeguards and guardrails we put in place, I think this is should be more doable for the insurance industry. And I'm working with the IA, and IA is providing assistance in talking to the insurers in Hong Kong, global insurers in Hong Kong, to find a way in which to provide a reasonable level of insurance. The hot storage part, I think it's, as we require, like 2% of total should be in hot, only 2%. So that part, I think, should be 100% insured.
We're coming up very close with time. So you've walked us through your priorities. No doubt, collaborating, cross-departmental collaboration within the government, with your regulatory counterparts, how Hong Kong plays a role in the global stage, and drilling in closer to home, our gateway to China, and also bringing capital investment into Hong Kong. And nonetheless, we've repeatedly surrounded the theme on sustainability, sustainable finance, and also digital assets development. We've filled in a lot, but let me ask you a very open-ended last questions. What would be your key takeaways for our audience here? Before we invite you back again, what do you want them to walk away with and remember?
I think you've covered all the key messages. It's been around go tech, go green, but stay resilient.
Loud and clear. On that note, thank you, Julia, for your generous sharing. And let's just give Julia another round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for attending the Fireside today. So on your way out, we would greatly appreciate if you could scan the QR code by the swag bags that we've got out there. And also, if you're hungry, grab a lunch. We ordered some Mortys. I believe there is not just beef. I think there's a vegetarian box as well. So trying to cater to all tastes. So yeah, thanks, everyone, for coming. Greatly appreciated, and welcome. Come back for our next event. Thank you.